welcome you all to this webinar on US-China relations after 100 days of the Biden administration. To speak on the subject, we have with us Professor Ta Wei, who is professor at the Department of International Relations, Tsinghua University, and also the Deputy Director of the Center for International Strategy and Security at Tsinghua. Professor Ta's research expertise covers China-US relations and US security and foreign policy. He has worked in China's academic and policy community for more than 2 decades. Prior to his current position, he used to be assistant president of University of International Relations and director of the Institute of American Studies at the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations. Professor Ta has written many policy papers for the Chinese government and has also published many academic papers in journals in China, US, and other countries. Chairing the session this afternoon is Ambassador Ashok Kantha, Director, Institute of Chinese Studies. Before we begin, I would like to remind our participants today that during the duration of the event, all participants except the speaker shall remain muted. Participants are requested to send in their questions via the chat box or use the raise hand option. Please unmute yourself only when called upon to do so by the chair. I will now invite the chair to begin the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Rija. Let me also extend a very warm welcome to our speaker, Professor Ta Wei of Tsinghua University, Beijing. Rija has already introduced Professor Ta. As you know, he's a leading Chinese scholar specializing in China-US relations and American studies. As Rija mentioned, he'll be speaking on the subject US-China relations after 100 days of the Biden administration. We had the pleasure of hosting a Wednesday seminar by Professor Ta Wei a year ago. In fact, if I remember correctly, it was on 29th April 2020. The seminar was very well received, and it's good to have you back with us, Professor Ta Wei. Coincidentally, we had renowned sinologist, Professor Andrew Nathan of Columbia University, delivering the VP Dutt Memorial Lecture last Wednesday on Biden's China policy. Today, we are fortunate to have a well-known scholar from China covering the same broad theme. Professor Ta Wei has argued that the Biden administration is forming what he calls a long-term competition strategy towards China. Under this strategy, the US and China will coexist and compete at the same time. Indeed, if you look at the first 100 days of the Biden administration, we have had signs that while, like his predecessor, Biden continues to treat China as a strategic competitor, he is also exploring cooperation between the two countries in areas of convergent interests like the climate change. We look forward to hearing from Professor Ta what are the elements of continuity and change in the Biden administration China policy and the future prospects of this extremely important relationship. We'd, of course, like to understand the implications of the evolving contours of Sino-US relations for India and India-China relations. It's my pleasure now to invite Professor Ta Wei to speak. After his remarks, he's agreed to take some questions. As Rija mentioned, you can pose your question in the chat box. Alternatively, you may use the raise hand feature. Over to you, Professor Ta Wei.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kantha, and thank ICS inviting me again for this wonderful platform. It's really my great honor to be here for the second time. Yes, about a year ago I was here, and that was a good memory. So this is really my honor. And before I start, I want to express my sympathy and also my support to India and our Indian colleague and the Indian people. We know that India is in a difficult time now, fighting against the COVID. We Chinese suffer the same challenge last year in the year 2020, and I know the feeling. I know how difficult the situation is. So I have this empathy, I will say. Though I'm not a doctor, I'm not a public health, I'm not a scholar doing research on public health, But if there is anything I personally can do, or my center can do, or my university can do, we'd love to provide, and please let us know. So we are with you together. This is a crisis. This is a virus that no country can prevail by itself. I think this is a challenge to the human right, to the human being. Okay, I will. The topic, the theme is about the China-U.S. relations after the 100 day of the Biden administration. I will use maybe about to share with you my observation, and then I'd love to take some questions. I will basically touch upon three things, 3 points. The first one is my general assessment of current status of the China-U.S. relations. If I don't know if you follow Chinese media or social media closely or not, and I'm not very sure about how the Indian media reports have reported about the China-U.S. relations since January. But if you follow Chinese media, particularly nowadays, the social media, you will have a feeling that that China and the U.S. these bilateral relations are in a very difficult period, or I will say tense. This is a general general impression in China, general perception in China. Though I personally don't agree with this widely accepted idea or perception in China. I think China-U.S. relations is in a, I will call it in a stalemate since January. Of course, in the past 3 years, since the year 2018, China-U.S. relations were in a very bad shape in the Trump administration. And now 100 days passed, and the Biden administration is in office. We have not seen dramatic improvement of the bilateral relations, but we also haven't seen any major deterioration or conflicts or confrontation between the two sides. So I call it a stalemate. Both sides are waiting for the other side to take initiative, to take major step to improve or at least to stabilize the bilateral relations. But so far, neither side has taken any meaningful steps, I will say, or major steps. There are some steps, but not a major one. So it's a stalemate. Again, I don't agree with the popular view in China that China-U.S. relations is in a very, very bad shape, or the Biden administration is just another kind of Trump administration. I don't agree with that. I think it's still too early to draw a conclusion on the Biden administration, because this is only the 100 day. If we look back and study the history of, for instance, the first 100 day of the Trump administration, the first 100 day of Obama administration, and the first 100 day of the Bush 43 administration, all these 3 administrations have their first 100 days are extremely different from the following 4 years or 8 years. The Bush administration called China kind of competitor before they swore in, and China and the U.S. have a so-called EP3 incidents in the South China Sea in the first 100 days. That was on the April the 1st, 2001. So we had a very difficult 100 day with the Bush 43 administration, but after that we had a pretty good relationship, and the Obama administration had a pretty good 100 day with China, and called for so-called G2, Group 2, this kind of arrangements. But then we had a very difficult year of 2010, the second year of the Obama administration. And also the first 100 day of Trump administration is okay, or the first year of Trump administration is okay. But the bilateral relations went into kind of trade war in the year 2018. So the first 100 day, at least in past 3 administrations, I will say, were extremely different from the following years. So we don't know what does that mean? What does the Biden's first 100 days mean for the whole? I don't know how long he will be in office, but for his at least the next 4 years. So again, this is in a stalemate, and the two sides. I mean, both China and both Chinese and American government has reached out and has done some engagement to the other side, governmental engagement. I think they are in a very low profile, but that's very important because China and the U.S. has almost no governmental contact or engagement in last year. I mean, because of the bad relationship and also because of the pandemic. But this year, at least, we have very important 4 occasions so far. The first one is on February the 6th, when when Director Yang Jiechi, the member of the Politburo, member of CCP, had a phone call with Secretary of State Blinken. I think this phone call paved the way for the second event. That was the phone call between the 2 presidents, President Xi and President Biden on February the 11th. And that was on the New Year Eve of Chinese lunar calendar, or Lunar New Year, eve of the Chinese Lunar New Year. So the most important day in the whole year, I would say, for the Chinese at least. That was on February 11th. And the third very important event was on March 18th. I think that was the Alaska Anchorage meeting, so-called 2+2. Yang Jiechi, Wang Yi met with Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. And of course, the third event, I think, the third event was a product of the presidential phone call in February. So the second event, the presidential phone call, paved the way for the senior officials' comprehensive dialogue on March 18th and March 19th. From media, of course, we know that the 2 sides had a very heated, intense discussion, particularly in the public session before the journalists. But so far as I know, the discussion was effective, and the 2 sides at least they had finished, completed the 2 days, 3 sessions, and accomplished the goal that they set before the meeting. And though there's no major announcement of the 2 sides, but I think that meeting in Anchorage, I think, paved the way for engagement in the future. Then the 4th event, I will say, was the video conference on summit, on climate, and President Xi attended that, accepted the invitation from the U.S. side and attended the video conference on the climate change. So that was probably the first time after January 20th that President Xi and President Biden saw each other, though not in person, not personally, but at least in the multilateral platform. So it's kind of, we can say this is a kind of virtual summit. Of course, this is not a bilateral one, but it's a virtual summit between the 2 sides. So very important, the 4th event. And of course, before the 4th event of the climate change summit, the envoy on climate change, John Kerry, visited Shanghai and talked to China's Chinese special envoy Xie Zhenhua on climate change issue, and also Vice Premier Han Zheng talked with Special Envoy Kerry on the issue through video conference too. So again, I will say, though no major big breakthrough, the two sides has make some very low profile and effective and necessary communications so far. So I think we should not be too pessimistic about the bilateral relations. So this is the first point I want to say. We still need to wait for the coming months, particularly in the second half of the year. The second point I would like to say is the major risks. The major risks that the two countries are facing in the bilateral relations. I think there are at least three major risks that the two countries, China and the US, are facing in these bilateral relations. The first one is, I think I touched upon this very briefly in my first point. I think the two countries, both countries have a kind of sentiment of the victim. Both sides have a sense of victim. The two countries believe that they are the victim of the wrongdoings of the other side. And China believes that the US has done a lot of wrong things in the Trump administration. So now it's time, since the Trump administration, since the US people already punished President Trump by election, by voting. So it's time for the US side to correcting the wrongs, to cite the wording that the foreign minister Wang Yi used in one of his speech, and correcting the wrongs. It's time for the US to correcting the wrongs. If you correct the wrongs and correct the cause, then we can together improve or at least stabilize the bilateral relations. So China side are waiting for the US side to take the lead in these bilateral relations. While I think on the US side, they have the similar sentiments. And I think the majority view in the US is China's foreign policy has become very assertive and even aggressive in past 8 years or 4 years. And China utilized the period of weakness of the American side. Some people may say the US has been in a period of weakness since the financial crisis after the year 2008. And some democratic elites, well, they will argue that in the past 4 years, the US, because of the very difficult domestic political situation in the US, China utilized that and pushed China's own foreign policy agenda very, very hard. So now now the US is coming back and is on a normal track. So it's China's turn to correcting the wrongs. And China now need to change its policy. So many, and also I think the Biden administration don't want to be viewed as weak if they take initiative in these bilateral relations. So they don't want to be attacked by their opponents domestically. So the two sides, both sides are waiting for the other side to take the lead. This is the first risks. First risk, if both sides are waiting for the other side, probably that means no one will take actions. And the second risk is, I think there is a gap between the slowing action, slow action, slow move on the US side and high expectation on China side. The Biden administration, I think, intentionally change its China policy very, very slowly. They want to do it very, very carefully and patiently. They want to consult with, first of all, reach a consensus domestically, and then they want to reach a consensus or at least consult with alliances and also the partners before they stage out any China policy. So this is not a surprise for us, actually. But I say us, I mean those experts or scholars here in China that we knew that the Biden administration may be very slow even if they want to change its the Trump administration's China policy. But for the public here in China, I think they are losing their patience. They think that now it's already 100 days. The Biden administration looks even at least as harsh as the Trump administration. And on China side, we have a quite high expectation towards the Biden administration. Though Chinese government rarely express this high expectation, we can see this from the actions and the speeches from the Chinese officials. Since January 20th, since the inauguration of Biden administration, I think the senior diplomats in China has made at least, I think, 5 or 6 important speeches regarding China-U.S. relations. I think Director Yang Jiechi made 2 speeches. Wang Yi, I think, made at least 2 speeches, our foreign minister. And then our deputy foreign minister, Le Yicheng, made 1 speech and also accepted an interview from the American press. So all those 3 senior diplomats has expressed their will to improve or is to stabilize the bilateral relations, and also their expectation towards to the U.S. side. I mean, so here the U.S. moving slowly while China side have a very high expectation. This kind of gap, this mismatch, I think could be dangerous. Again, if we look back to the history of China-U.S. relations, not a very long history, but again, in past, let's say 10 years, that this kind of gap happened before. In the first year of the Obama administration, I said that the Obama administration had a very high expectation towards China, working with China on global agenda, particularly on climate change, but China moved quite slowly at that time. And after the Copenhagen conference, after Obama's visit to China, the bilateral relations stepped into a very, very difficult time in the year 2010, the second year of the Obama administration. That was the first time that this kind of gap endangered the bilateral relations. And then in the first year of the Trump administration, again, that was the Trump administration had a very high expectation towards China, and President Trump believed that because he believed he was a tough president and the tough guy, and China will have kind of fear towards him. So when he showed his toughness, China will surrender. So that's a very high expectation. He expected China changing its policy once he became the president. But again, China didn't change its policy in the first year of Trump administration. But we received his visit to China very warmly, and the 2 sides, and also the President Xi Jinping visited the Mar-a-Lago, had a summit. So we hope that we can have kind of Tai Chi or tango at least with with the Trump administration, while they are on the US side, they are not that patient. So in the second year, the bilateral relations had problems. So this is the third time that we had this kind of gap between the two countries. But this time it turns out to be that China has a very high expectation, while the US side moved very slowly. But I think that could cause problems. So this is the second risk. The third risk, I think, is the domestic elements, the domestic politics in the two countries. I think both sides, both Washington and Beijing, are facing very strong, very hostile. I mean, by hostile, I mean hostile toward the other country. I mean, the two governments are facing nationalistic and also hardline policy advocates domestically or at home. So the U.S., the Biden administration had a fear that it would be attacked by their political opponent. Particularly next year, they will have the midterm election. So, and don't forget that Joe Biden was called Beijing Biden. So no matter what his policy will be, he will always be criticized by the Republican as pro-Beijing, pro-China. So there also in the Congress, I think the Congress is trying to shape the bilateral relations. They are pushing for the 2021 Strategic Competition Act and try to shape the agenda for the very long, in the long run. I mean, in following decades, probably that if that act be passed, I will say the Congress will shape the policy for the long run. And in China, I think the Chinese government is also facing a very nationalistic public opinion and also environment at home. I think no matter it's elites or the general public, the average Chinese, I think their disapproval rate, their I would say a hostile attitude towards the U.S. has grown very rapidly in recent years. So our government also don't want to be viewed as weak. The two governments, I believe that both Beijing and Washington have an aspiration to stabilize the bilateral relations, but their respective domestic environment is quite limited, I will say, will limit their capability to stabilize the bilateral relations. So these are the three risks that I think the two countries are facing. The third point I would like to touch upon is the so-called, as Professor Kanza mentioned, the long-term competition strategy. I co-authored a paper for the government with Ms. Wang Jingshu, who is also in this webinar. So expressed our view. I think we believe that the Biden administration, though again, I said it's still too early to say, but I think a kind of we call that a long-term competition. This strategy is emerging in the U.S. and probably in the second half of this year, maybe we will see it clearer, I guess, by calling the Biden administration's policy or strategy as long-term competition. I have several points to make here. The first one is I think the Biden administration is repositioning China. China is a challenge to the U.S. So it's a little bit different from Russia. Russia, I think, more or less enemy or threat from the US perspective. China is a challenge, though this challenge is huge, is the biggest challenge. And it's much, much bigger than Russia's threat. But again, China is a threat. By calling China a threat or competitor, that means that these bilateral relations, China-US relations, could or have a potential to develop into different paths, not necessarily a hostile or adversarial path. Maybe it's more complex, I will say. So this is the first thing. It's China is a challenge, though this is a huge, biggest challenge the US have ever met after the end of the Cold War. The second point I would like to say regarding the long-term competition is the core of this, the essence of this strategy is the US and China have to coexist. The two countries have to live in this world. No country can defeat the other country. No country can dramatically change the other side's policy, and neither side will collapse. So the two countries, no matter, though we don't like So the long-term competition is, I will say, a competitive coexistence. China and the US will coexist, but it's a competitive coexistence. All the competition, this long-term competition have a precondition. This precondition is the China and the US have to live together, have to be there for a very, very long time. This is the second point. The third point I would like to say is this long-term competition is different from the Cold War, and also it's different from strategic confrontation, which we saw in the at least in the last year of the Trump administration. So China is a challenge rather than an enemy. So the U.S. goal is not to harm China to safeguard its interest. It's a real competition. So the U.S. want to strengthen its comparative advantage in this competition with China. So this is the third point. The fourth point is what are the things that what are the elements that the Biden administration want to compete with China? I think two things. One is the domestic situation. Which country can develop its own economy and solve its own social problem better? Then the country will prevail in this competition. So it's about who can be better rather than, or who can be stronger rather than can I weaken the other side? Can I undermine the other side? So it's a competition over the domestic situation. Another element that the US want to compete with China is the environment. I said that the Biden administration believe that China and the US have to live together in this world. So what will be very important for the Biden administration, for the US, is the environment. In which environment China and the US will live, and is the environment good? Is the environment helpful for the US to prevail in this competition? So they want to have a benign, helpful, and beneficiary environment to the US. So this environment is composed of three things. One is the alliances. The alliance system is something that the US has, but China doesn't. So if the US can coordinate with its allies and the partners. The second one is the values. The US believe that their value is more popular, is more popular than Chinese in the world. So the US must emphasize the values, human rights, this kind of thing. They think this is their comparative advantage. The third thing they want about the environment is the rules. The US believe that they are very good at making the rules, and they want to make the rules and won't let China to make the rules. So this is the third comparative advantage of the US in the competition. So the elements that the Biden administration want to compete with China are the domestic development, the alliances, values, and the rules. The fifth point I would like to talk about, want to touch upon on this long-term competition is why I call it a long-term, or how to interpret, how to understand this long-term. I think this long-term, of course, it refers to a very long time frame, of course. Many people in the US believe that they will have this competition for at least 1 or 2 decades, or even for 1 or 2 generations. So it's by this long term. Of course, it means the time frame is very long. But I think it's more important than that. I think it have even stronger strategic implications. So we know that the Cold War author, the Cold War historian, John Gaddis wrote the book The Long Peace when he referred to the Cold War. And sometimes we also call the 19th century Europe as long peace. So let's forget the 19th century. I think if the Cold War is a long peace, then the time, I think, after the end of the Cold War to the September 11, I will call it a long prosperity, that all countries believe that if we join this globalization, if we, just like Fukuyama argued at the end of the history, if we take this, if we get on this automatic trends to the end of the history, all the countries will achieve prosperity. So that's another long prosperity. After September 11, I think the US military forces coined another term, the Long War, referring the global war on terrorism. So they believe that the US will fight against the terrorism and also the extremism for 1 or 2 decades. So that's the third long, the long war. Now we have the fourth long, that's the long competition. So from that regard, I will say this long-term competition is a very strategic one. It's not only in the 1 or 2 decades. The last point I would like to mention about this long-term competition strategy is about the policies. I think they have this idea, they have this conceptual framework already, but they don't have concrete policies. We still, I said that the Biden administration has been very slow making or reviewing the policy regarding China. So we are still waiting. We are still waiting for the policies. For instance, the policy about trade. We don't know. We don't know if the Biden administration, or when will the Biden administration start a negotiation with their Chinese counterpart to cut the trade, that extra trade, the tariffs, sorry, the extra tariffs imposed by Trump administration. We don't know. My hunch is that the Biden administration will sooner or later negotiate with China on those tax, on those tariffs, but probably, I think not, at least not this year. And will China and the US have a phase 2 trade agreement like the phase 1, which was reached in January 2020? I don't know. I think probably we have the opportunity in the future to negotiate for maybe phase 2 or maybe another, we change a name, change a title, I don't know. But a new trade agreement, that's possible. But again, I don't think it will happen this year. So this is the trade policy. Many don't know. And on the climate issue, this is the area that the two countries believe we have the greatest potential to cooperate, and we have the conflicts are relatively smaller. Yes, so far I think the cooperation is okay, it's good. Not only John Kerry visited China, I think he had a phone call with Xie Zhenhua before he visited, and the two teams working together, and the two countries agreed to set up a joint task force in Anchorage on the climate change issue. So I guess this area will achieve development this year and maybe next year. But I don't know the detail. But my hunch is China will be more cooperative, and also China will be very willing to work with the Biden administration, not only because this is an area that we can cooperate. I think China genuinely thinking that China's economic development need to be changed. The path of the economic development need to be changed into a green one. We believe that this is China is facing a serious challenges about the environment, and also China. We think that if we don't move quickly, then China will maybe lose the opportunity in the green economy. So if we move quickly enough, probably that will be an opportunity rather than a challenge for China in the green economy. But again, we still need to wait for the detail of the policies. The third one, I don't know, is the industrial policy. The US is also trying to make its industrial policy. And also we are still waiting for their policy review regarding for instance, the chip or the medicines, the rare earths, and also the batteries. We won't see the outcome, the result of the assessment before June. And after that, we will know if the Biden administration believes that their supply chain in those 4 areas are safe, and if it's necessary to change, to adjust the supply chain in those 4 areas. I think, in short, I think now the popular, the buzzword is small yard, high fence. This trend, this tendency, I think, is clear that the Biden administration will make the fence, the yard smaller, or the area that the part that U.S. government want to protect smaller, but want to make their protection more effectively, or make the fence higher. We just don't know how small this yard will be and how high this fence will be. Those are the policy details that we are waiting for. And once they have the policy, I hope the two countries, particularly on China's side, I think we have to accept, because this is their policy. This is American policy. This is not something that we can decide. So the two sides have to get used to the new sphere of the protection. We need to get used to the new yard and the new fence, and then we can have a sustainable, particularly the political sustainable bilateral relations. I think these are the issues that we are facing next phase. Okay, I think I already take too long time, so I will stop here. And all the comments and the questions are extremely welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thank you very much, Professor Tave, for your remarks. First of all, let me thank you for your words of sympathy and solidarity in the context of the second surge in the COVID pandemic in India. We really appreciate it. Professor Tave has offered some very insightful and even original remarks on where we stand in US-China relations and what kind of prospects he visualizes for this relationship. He pointed out that as far as the Chinese social media is concerned, the widely shared perception is that the relationship is going through a period of extreme difficulty. It's tense, but he doesn't share that perception. He believes that there's a stalemate in China-US relations, but relations are not in bad shape, as is widely believed in China. He has pointed out that some effective steps have been taken by both sides during the first 100 days of the Biden administration, but these are not good enough. So it's still, it's work in progress. He made this very important point that if you look at the first 100 days of Bush presidency, Obama presidency, and Trump presidency, developments during the initial 100 days and what transpired later during the remainder of the three presidencies were very different. And he seems to suggest that the same might be true when it comes to the Biden presidency as well. He has outlined some major risks in China-US relations, including a mismatch of expectations on both sides and feeling on both sides that it has been wronged, and for the other side to take the risk, to take the lead and take corrective action. Professor Tave believes that the Biden administration has been slow to change Trump administration China policy, and there are high expectations from China, but very limited or slow response from the US side so far. And while both sides would like to stabilize relations, there are some serious domestic complications on either side. Finally, Professor Tave has spelled out in some detail his very interesting proposition on long-term competitive strategy between China and the USA, where both countries have to coexist, but at the same time, they will continue to compete over a longer term time horizon, and this will be strategic competition. Thank you very much for your very interesting, very important, very insightful remarks. Now the floor is open for discussions and questions. I already have some raised hands and some questions in the chat box. Can I start with Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, who would like to raise a question? Over to you, Vishnu. Vishnu, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, I'm doing that. Greetings. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. Professor Tave, thank you for a very interesting exposition. I particularly liked your closing remarks that US will make the yard shorter, smaller, and the fences higher. I think this has been summed up very well. Permit me to be frank. If you permit me, I will speak with candor. You have spoken of the symptoms, but you have not spoken about the ailment. There's a difference between just pointing out the symptoms, but this 100-day theory is okay, except that since 2010, as you have noticed, under successive presidencies, there have been difficulties in the relationship and the difficulties have been increasing. So there is a certain trend. Now, you have also spoken about the sense of victimhood. Now, I would dare say, and pardon me for saying that China usually likes to project a sense of victimhood with practically every country, whether it is India, whether it's other countries. And also the fact is that China has difficulties in the relationship with very many countries. So is it not desirable to also look at the causes as to why there is a certain disposition among other countries, and why is it that the relationships are getting complicated? So that is what I wanted to ask you. And yes, thanks.
Um, I'm sorry. Can you say your question again? I didn't catch your question very
My
clear.
question is two small questions. One, when you say that China and US both feel that they are victims,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I would submit that China usually wears a cloak of victimhood
Yes.
with almost every country. I have never seen China admitting that there is a mistake committed, because there's no country which does not commit mistakes, right? But China would never admit, and always acquire a sense of victimhood, whether it is a century of humiliation, whether it is this or that. So that is a tactical uh, disposition of China. Secondly, why is it that for 10 years, the relationship between the US and China are getting more complicated? And not just with the US, China's relations with many countries are getting complicated. So there is a little more than what you are mentioning. Maybe it is desirable to look into the reasons, not just the symptoms.
Oh, so basically, why China's relationship with many countries has been being worse? You're asking me why, right?
Yes, I mean, there has
Yes.
to be a reason
Rather
for
than,
that.
yeah, I know. I will say, of course, there are many reasons, but one thing is if you ask me, if you permit me to pick just one reason, I will say it's because China is becoming bigger on the world stage. When you getting stronger, when you getting bigger, nobody will like you. I think this is something we have to accept, because you are changing the international political or power structure, and you are new, a major power, and you have new capability. You have, even if you don't have an intention to threat other countries will feel insecurity. I think this is something natural. Um, and this is a structural reason, because I'm an IR scholar, so I tend to explain the change of international relations from this structural level. And then, of course, under that level of explanation, you can say there are also many smaller things. For instance, I think you implied that China made some mistakes in its relations with other countries. I will say yes, of course. No country in the world won't make mistake. Many countries make mistake, and China also made mistakes. I myself also think China made mistakes. The problem is when if a country is confident enough, I think only the confident country can or will very willing to admit that it made mistakes. I think China is not that confident so far. So you rarely heard the Chinese government admit that we made some mistakes, right? Particularly for the mistake that we made in past 10 years. Um, that's right. I will say your observation is right, because we are not confident enough to say that yes, we made some mistake and we will change our policies. China admits that we made some mistakes in history. We had some, I will say, wrong policy. For instance, in Cultural Revolution, in our foreign policy, I think we also admit that. But in the very recent history, I don't think we are so confident. But again, policy is one level, but I think above the policy level, I think there is a structural level. This structural level, the explanation is China is rising, and then the structure has been changed. No country will like other country. For instance, particularly for India, this is your neighbor, right? Your neighbor become bigger and their capability is becoming stronger. That's a problem. I can understand that. And if when China have, for instance, when Soviet Union was very strong, China feel threatened. When Japan was very strong, China also feel insecure. So no matter it's correct or wrong, but that's something understandable. So I think that's the root cause, the structural explanation. So I understand your criticism over China's policy, and I partly agree with you. But I think beyond that, there is even much bigger one. The American colleagues always tell us that, does China want to be a superpower? If you want to be a superpower, then every country will criticize you, just like every country criticizes the US very much. We also criticize the US a lot. And this is the price of a major power. So China is not a superpower, but I think what their logic, I agree with their logic. When you become stronger, when you become bigger, then you have to, this is the price that you have to pay. Yeah, this is my answer to, yeah.
Thank you very much for your candor. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Can I now invite Professor Hemant Adlakar to pose his question? He has written the part of the question in the chat box, but invite him to come straight and ask the question. Hemant, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Okay, thank you. I didn't expect that I would be called in to ask my question. Anyway, thank you, Professor Tave. Good to hear you again. But before I ask my question, I must share with others also that this was my third interaction with you in the last 3 years. And our first one-to-one meeting was in your office in the University of International Relations in July 2019. And that was a very interesting, long discussion we had. And then last year, I heard you in the ICS webinar around the same time. And today is the third time. And I must admit that in the common thing in my 3 interactions with you has been that I found you have been extremely original in your perceptions and in your understanding of the US-China relationship. And I have benefited a lot from your understanding of this relationship. Now, my quick question is that you mentioned in your conclusions, your second point in your conclusions was that China and US must coexist. So I was wondering that given the peculiar escalating tensions which are continuing to endure even after Trump administration is no longer in office, and even after 100 days of Biden administration, the tension seems to be escalating. So in that context, when we look at this China-US relationship, do you think that perhaps coexist is not the right word? In Chinese, it is kongcun, but the right word perhaps is co-evolve, kongtung fachan. What do you think of these 2 terms? Please elaborate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And I also want to express my gratitude to, I'd love to call Professor Hemant Adlakar as 海老师 in Chinese. So for your kindly invitation to me. And it's always my pleasure to talk with you. And for your question, this is a very interesting one. I also think there is some kind of language differences or cultural differences here. I think first about the 2 terms that you used. Of course, we love co-evolution, co-evolve, as you said, 共同发展 in Chinese. But co-evolution means both China and the US need to evolve, and China will change or will develop on its own path, but we will learn from the US, while the US need to evolve and learn from China and other countries. But China, compared with the US, we're still a relatively weaker side, a weaker player here. We can't expect the US co-evolution with China, because if they don't choose that, we cannot force them to co-evolve with China. We hope that they can co-evolve with us, just like Dr. Kissinger. I think he raised this question, raised this term in the end of his book on China. In that book, he used the term co-evolution. He hoped this is the future of the China-US relations. But if President Biden listened to Dr. Kissinger, I think that's a fortune of both countries. But if he don't listen to him, if he doesn't listen to Dr. Kissinger, we Chinese cannot force them to do that. And here, one thing I want to say is, what is the coexistence when the US side use this term? It's not only in China and the US will be there. Of course, China and the US, the two countries will always be there. I think the change, the new elements in the US thinking is US cannot change China. I think in the past, the US always believed that they can change China's future, they can change China's strategic direction, or they can change China's policy. When the US adopted the engagement strategy towards China, they want to engage China and try to shape China's future, try to shape China's direction into, I will say, Americanized or some market economy plus democratic political system. So they want China to enter that approach. That's changing China. Behind the engagement, there is the aspiration of changing China. While during the Trump administration, the Trump administration adopted a very harsh policy towards China. They also want to change China, but this time it's different approach. They want to change at least change China's policy by force, by their strength, by the strength of the US. They think since President Trump, he believed he was a very, very powerful leader, China side will be fearful. Then China will change the policy. Now the Biden administration believes that both Trump's position and the logic of the engagement strategy were wrong. China is such a big elephant like India. China is always China. China won't be shaped by the US. They want to abandon this aspiration of shaping China's future. China will be China, no matter you like it or not. So then this is a precondition, then the US will compete with that kind of China, will compete with a country, with a China that they cannot shape. So I think this is something very new, different from past four decades. But in Chinese, 共存 cannot express these new elements. But I don't have other Chinese translation, so coexistence is 共存 in Chinese. But I think the Biden administration is developing some very new idea in their strategy. Yeah, again, thank you very much for your question and also your invitation. Yeah.
Thank you. 非常感谢.
Thank you very much, Professor Tawe, for that response. I have a couple of questions in the chat box. One question is from Mr. Amom Singh. He's talking about an article he wrote recently, which he refers to the US experiencing China threat in two dimensions: economy and security, and military rivalry between USA and China also becoming sharper. He wants your comment on whether China is really a threat to the USA.
Does that mean a military threat or
he's talking about both economic challenge and security threat, military threat.
that's hard to say. I will say, of course, China don't want to be a threat of the U.S. And if we are viewed as a threat, then the U.S. will adopt a hostile policy towards China and make China's external environment even worse. But to be honest, though you don't want to you don't want to be a threat to the U.S., there are some elements that are probably zero sum. For example, in the economic area, China want to build strong industries. China want to build a strong economy, and we want to occupy the most profitable elements or the part on the value chain. Of course, we don't want to only produce T-shirt or shoes or toy. We also want to build chips. We want to build airplanes to earn money. But for instance, there are only two major airplane producers. That's Boeing and Airbus. If China want to be the third one, that means the Boeing and the Airbus will have the competitor. So if we are very, very successful, they will lose. So from that regard, I will say there is some competitive, or you can even call China as a threat, if that's a threat. I mean, if you define threat in that regard. And on military side, I think it's same. China want to build, we say, world-class military forces. But now there is only one world-class military force. That's a US military force. If China want to be at that level, then the US will have a rival here. So if you say this is a threat, I will admit that China could be a threat, because these things are zero sum. If China is stronger, then the US will feel threatened, though China don't want to be a threat, because this is not wise to be viewed as threat. And China, we also have other agendas, like we want to reunify with Taiwan, while the US believe that this is something that the US need to stop if China, at least if China want to use military forces. So again, I will say China, just as Secretary Blinken pointed out, I agree with him that there are competitive, cooperative, and also adversarial elements in the bilateral relations. And the competitive and adversary elements could be a threat to the US. But don't forget, we still have cooperative or collaborative elements in the bilateral relations. So we need to control those threat part. So I won't say China no threat at all. I think that's too naive. International politics sometimes could be very cruel. So what we need to do is to control the process, to manage it, and then to expand the area of the cooperation with the US. So in short, it depends on how do you define threat. We rarely use the word threat, but there are competitive and adversarial elements in the bilateral relations. Yes.
Thank you. I'll now invite Ambassador Saurabh Kumar to ask his question. He has raised his hand. Saurabh, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Tave. And I would like to take your answer to the first question, the structural perspective that you mentioned. Permit me to say I don't disagree, but you will permit me a frank observation that I don't think it goes far enough. It's a factor, and I will be specific. How would you react to the question that what do you think is the contribution of the factor on the Chinese side, the structural factor of an asymmetry in the structure of non-transparency to the root problem of all that we are discussing, the US-China relations? The problem is at root, I think you will agree, that there is a perception that China is a problem. Not only in the US, it's in the rest of the world, as the first question pointed out. So, to elaborate a little, just very briefly, what do you think, for example, is the contribution of this asymmetric advantaging by China? You see, the very fact, now look at this discussion. We are talking or discussing US-China relations entirely in terms of the US discourse. They call it long-term strategic competition, partly adversarial, partly. We don't discuss it in terms of the Chinese discourse because we don't know. And then we demolish this or we parse it whichever way. So how is this fair? You see that you pick on some example. For example, the perception really deteriorated in President Trump's late in his presidency, June last year onwards. Some actions were there, strong actions, etc. But after the 4 speeches by the 4 leading officials of the Trump administration, there was a rounded overall perception of China being a problem for the rest of the world. And it arose out of this asymmetry. So we have to consider that, to my mind, if I may take the liberty of answering the first question partly and asking you about how you would react to that answer, that it is this, you see, China was ultra sensitive in the early phase of COVID to anybody who asked a question about it. You took it as blame. You means China. And all the wolf warrior diplomacy is at the root of the perception that China is a problem. Now, if we attribute it to the fact that China is bigger, we are hiding away from something that is staring us in the face. I'll be very frank. And so is this something that causes concern in the US, and how would you react to that understanding? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this question. First of all, I want to say, actually, when I answer the first question, I also want to say this, but I forget. I don't agree with the assessment that China is viewed by the rest of the world as a problem. I think China is viewed by some countries. I don't know how many, but I won't say the rest of the world. It's not China versus the rest of the world. I think there are many countries, and if we look at the polls, even done by the American organizations like Pew, I will say China's image has been being problematic majorly in the developed world, and also in some neighboring countries, including India, Japan. But if you go to some, for example, some South Asian country or African country, the Middle East, Latin American, and some Southeast Asian countries, I think the picture is more complex. If you comparing China with the US, probably if you ask me to use one sentence to say, I will say both 2 countries were viewed as problematic by many countries. So this is my first thing I want to say. The second thing, I totally agree with you about the asymmetric phenomenon in this. No matter we explain China's policy or China-US relations, yes, this is a world that with asymmetry. Just like it's not because China, yes, comparing with the US, I will say China is not as parent as the US. But how many countries are as parent as the US in the world? I don't know. Probably some European countries are very transparent, but I will say the majority country in the world are not transparent. I will say, for instance, I think many scholars also are speculating, for instance, the intention and also the policy making process of India. We also don't understand India very well. I mean, transparency is a relative term. And also China is not as transparent as the US for several reasons. One is political system. I will say China's political system is not as transparent as the US and other democratic country. And another thing is culture and the language, this kind of thing. For example, when I have a webinar with American colleagues, we always use English. We never use Chinese. No, I will say rarely Chinese American scholar can speak Chinese. So this is asymmetric. And when I have webinars with foreign friends, colleagues like this one, we use Zoom. We never use Chinese apps like Tencent conference. But actually in China, when we have webinar, we only use Tencent conference. This is not asymmetric. This is asymmetric. We have no other choice. And China is not very good at expressing its own strategy. So then we have to use the term, as you pointed out very correctly, use the term that American side used. This is I will say disadvantage of developing country, and I will even say this is a heritage of colonialism, of imperialism. So the countries, at least like China, I won't say, I'm not sure if India is also, but those countries in the periphery can hardly express itself very well. India maybe is better because culture is different and you have language advantage. But I tend to answer your question from these different levels: political system, cultural, and also the heritage of the history. So the outcome is China is not very transparent. Is not as transparent as the American side. So this, I know this put China in a difficult situation, but how can I solve the problem? I don't know. Yeah, so I want to thank you to point it out this element in these bilateral relations, but I have no other choice because this is China is this kind of country. We are a country led by the Communist Party, and we are a country of Oriental culture, Asian culture. It's different from the West, so we cannot. We cannot just become American, right? So we have no other choice. Yeah, thank you. This is my answer to your question. Thank you very much. Sorry, you need to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Professor Tawe. We have run out of time, but if you permit, we take two very short questions and request you to give short answers.
Okay, yes, I will.
Really run out of time.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll combine two questions, one by General Prabir Chakravarti and one by Professor Anantagiri. I'll request the General and the Professor to keep the questions very short, 1 or 2 sentences each. General Chakravarti, can you start? Unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Now you can hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Yes, I have unmuted. Very short question to Professor Dawi. I'm very lucky I'm meeting you for the second time, and I'm asking you, the question is, Biden has strengthened the quadrilateral dialogue between, or shall we say, the quadrilateral meetings between United States, Australia, India, and Japan. How does China, think about it?
Okay, Professor Anantagiri.
Thank you so much, Professor Dave and also Ji. Now, in terms of your charting of this relationship between US and China, your whole methodology has been only US and China. But that also needs to be understood in a dynamically changing world context. And in your analysis, we didn't get an engagement with that. And a very quick related question is that in terms of your charting from the present to the future, as you very rightly characterized, that it is a long epoch. And that is a dynamic situation. And how do we understand the kind of multiple processes, including the unanticipated one, and the role of the young generation? Because the young generations, whether the young generations embody a different kind of aspiration compared to the present ruling generation.
So the question about the opinion of the younger generation, you mean in China?
Yes, not both China and USA, and not only the opinion, but the kind of anticipated evolving ways of being and becoming.
Yeah.
But we cannot hold it static. It seems that your image of the future seems to be projected from what it is, but that future also is an uncharted journey, depending upon a lot of evolutionary dynamics.
Okay, thank you. The first question about Quad. My short answer is China. I will say the majority view in China is we have some concern over the Quad, and we don't want it evolved into an anti-China group, and we watch it very carefully, and we try to not to draw conclusion over the Quad too early, but I think the majority view is this is something that the four countries want to at least work together with some kind of concern over China. So we think it could be unfriendly to China. So it's worrisome from Chinese perspective, and we hope we don't have time today talk too much about other countries, I mean, beyond China and the US, but we hope India keep its long tradition of independent diplomacy, independent foreign policy, rather than to follow the US or other countries too closely. So this is our view here, and our concern is we don't want it evolve into a anti-China and the multilateral alliances of the US. I think that's my answer. The second question, I still don't understand it very well, but I think at least if talk about China and the US, the younger generation of the two countries, I think they become I have to separate them. I think in China, the younger generation, they are more confident because they grew up in the environment that China developed very fast, its economy. So they are very confident and they are very open, and they know very well about the US and the outside world. So they are more willing to accept unfriendly US-China relations, because even if it's unfriendly, I think they are confident enough that China, it will be okay. And on the US side, I think the younger generation is also, they don't have historic burden. So they view China as a major power when they were young. So their policy will be when they become decision maker, their policy will be very different from the old China hand. But one thing I want to say about the younger generation is when the younger generation's view will always evolve. When they become older, when they become decision maker, when they interact with the other country, I think their view will change. So those structural reasons, those policy background will change their view in the future. So I don't want to exaggerate their differences from the older generation. I think when they are in the position, probably those structural reasons will play the role in their decision. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Professor Tave. I'm sure there are many more questions, but we have really run out of time. So let me thank Professor Tave for his presentation today. His presentation was lucid, thoughtful, insightful, and he handled the questions, a large number of questions, with candor. We appreciate that. And all in all, we had a very enlightening seminar today, for which we owe a great deal of gratitude to Professor Tave. I've not tried to sum up, all that he had said, because he had a very rich offering for us. But I was struck by, one significant difference that I noticed compared to a talk I referred to in my welcome remarks by Professor Andrew Nathan. He delivered an important VP Dutt Memorial lecture last Wednesday. And his basic argument was that in the first 100 days of the Biden presidency, the main elements or contours of the US-China policy have already taken shape. Those elements have fallen in place, and it's a case of very significant differences in the Biden administration's China policy compared to Trump administration's China policy. While in some areas there is continuity, for instance, on the issue of maintaining strategic competition or on issues like Quad, but in many other areas, Biden has already made a significant departure from what Trump had to pursue with regard to China policy. Whereas Professor Tave's argument is that first 100 days of Biden administration, the US-China relations are characterized by stalemate, but this is not necessarily a good indicator of shape of things to come. He argued that Biden, in fact, has been rather slow in terms of changing the policies inherited from his predecessor, and that there is an impatience on the Chinese side, expectation on the Chinese side that there'll be faster and greater changes taking place in the US-China policy. Let's see how things evolve, but I would like to thank Professor Tave for his insightful remarks and also for his proposition on long-term competition strategy, which is being pursued by USA vis-a-vis China. There are some sophisticated arguments he has offered, which have provided much food for thought. Thank you very much, Professor Tave, and we hope to welcome you back to our Institute of Chinese Studies in not too distant a future, perhaps in person once things improved. Last two visits to my institute have been in virtual capacity because of the pandemic that we are facing, but as things improve, we hope that you'll be able to visit us in person. Thank you very much once again for your remarks, for your
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really my great honor and pleasure. Yeah, hope to see you in person in the not too long future. Thank you.
That's the expectation too. Thank you very much. Let me wish all the participants, good health. So this is something we need at this point of time. And thank you very much for joining us for this seminar.